My fingers were ice cold, but my head was perfectly clear. That's the thing nobody tells you about the worst moments of your life: your brain doesn't shut down. It sharpens. It was a Saturday evening in late October, the kind of night that feels like it belongs only to Toronto, that particular chill off Lake Ontario cutting through even the warmest coat, the city lights blurring gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the private dining room I'd rented at Canoe. 42 people. My closest friends, my colleagues, my family. All there to celebrate the biggest moment of my professional life. I had just settled a licensing agreement worth $3.2 million for a medical data software platform I'd spent 6 years building in my spare bedroom. $3.2 million, wired clean into my personal account 2 days earlier. And my husband had organized the entire evening. That should have been my first sign. My name is Claire. I'm 41 years old. I'm a software architect. I'm a mother to my 8-year-old daughter Sophie. And for 11 years I was a wife to a man named Daniel. Daniel, who wore his charm the way other men wear cologne applied carefully every morning, a little too much on special occasions. Daniel, who had never once asked me how the platform was progressing but somehow knew the exact settlement figure before I'd told anyone outside my lawyer. I remember standing near the window with my glass of champagne, half listening to my colleague Priya talk about her maternity leave plans, when I saw him. Daniel. He was standing by the service table near the back of the room where the catering staff had lined up the glasses for the toast. His back was to me. His right hand moved quickly, briefly, a small motion, deliberate, practiced. And then he turned around with 2 glasses and walked toward me, smiling. I have replayed that 10-second clip in my mind 10,000 times since then. I didn't freeze. That surprised me later. I think I expected that if something like this ever happened, if you ever suspected the man you shared a bed with for 11 years was doing something terrible, you would fall apart. Your knees would give. You'd make a sound. But I didn't. I felt my fingers go cold around my own glass. I felt something settle behind my eyes. Quiet and deliberate. And I thought, not yet. Don't react yet. Watch. He handed me the glass with that smile, the wide one, the one that used to make me feel chosen, special. To my brilliant wife, he said, loud enough for the table nearest to us to hear. The smartest woman in any room she walks into. I laughed. I clinked. I did not drink. Daniel's mother, Margaret, appeared at my elbow about 4 minutes later, as she always did at gatherings, orbiting the center of attention like a small but insistent moon. Margaret and I had never been warm. She believed her son had married beneath himself, which was remarkable considering Daniel had spent the previous decade working a middle management position at a logistics company in Mississauga that he'd only kept because I'd quietly asked my contact at the firm to put in a word for him after his second layoff. But Margaret didn't know that. Margaret knew only that her son was wonderful and that his wife worked too much and traveled too often and made too much money for a woman who still wore her hair in a ponytail at board meetings. You must be so proud, she said to me, in the tone she reserved for things she found vaguely distasteful. I am, I said. She reached past me to set down her handbag on the windowsill, and in that small collision of bodies and movement, I made a decision I will spend a long time thinking about. I switched our glasses. Mine for hers. I did it in the same practiced, deliberate way Daniel had done it at the service table, back half turned, motion small, smooth, invisible. I am not proud of it. I want to be honest about that. But I am also not going to pretend I didn't do it. 12 minutes later, Margaret set down her glass, pressed one hand to her chest, and said to the woman beside her that she felt strange. Not ill, she said. Strange. Like something was wrong with her balance. Her daughter-in-law Daniel's sister Rebecca helped her to a chair. By the time I crossed the room, Margaret's face had gone an unsettling shade of gray and her words were coming out slightly slurred. I called 911 myself. I stayed with her until the paramedics arrived. I held her hand. I told her she was going to be okay. I told her that repeatedly, and I meant it, because the thought that it might not be true was the one thing that night that made me feel actual fear. She was okay. She spent 2 nights at Toronto General, treated for what the attending physician initially described as a suspected adverse reaction. Tachycardia. Disorientation. A blood pressure drop significant enough to be alarming. But she recovered. I know that. I held on to that fact in the weeks that followed like it was the only solid object in a room that kept shifting under my feet. The glass, Margaret's glass, the one she'd set down on the windowsill I picked up after the ambulance left. I wrapped it in a cloth napkin from the table. I went home that night and put it in a Ziploc freezer bag and placed it in the back of the freezer, behind a container of leftover butternut squash soup. I don't entirely know why. Something in me understood, even then, that I was going to need it. Daniel was the picture of concern that night. He rode in the ambulance with his mother. He called me from the hospital at 11:30 to give updates. His voice was tight and appropriately frightened. I sat in our kitchen in Rosedale with a cup of tea I didn't drink, listening to him, and I thought, how are you doing this? How are you standing in a hospital corridor performing grief for a woman you put in that bed? And then I thought, how long have you been performing things I couldn't see? That question was the one that unraveled everything. I'd been so focused for 6 years on building something. The platform, the licensing negotiations, the late nights, and the travel and the meetings. Daniel had been supportive. On the surface. Encouraging, even. He told me once that watching me work was the most attractive thing he'd ever seen. I had believed him. I had believed a great many things. I started quietly 2 weeks after the dinner. I didn't hire anyone, not at first. I just started paying attention to things I'd trained myself not to notice. The second phone he kept in the glove compartment of his Audi, which I'd assumed was an old work phone. The way our joint account had been running lower than it should given our expenses. The name Melissa that appeared in his calendar as a recurring Wednesday lunch, listed under the innocuous heading Client Check-in. We didn't have any clients named Melissa. Daniel worked in logistics. I called my lawyer, Patricia, on a Tuesday morning from the parking garage of my office building, sitting in my car with the engine off. Patricia had been my lawyer since I incorporated the company I eventually sold the platform through. She was 56, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had a way of delivering devastating information in a voice of absolute administrative calm that I had always found deeply reassuring. "Tell me what you know," she said. I told her everything. The glass. The gesture at the service table. The second phone. The account balance. The Wednesdays. There was a brief silence on her end. "Okay," she said. "Don't touch the joint account. Don't move anything. Don't let him know you're looking. And bring me that glass." I brought her the glass the next morning. She had a contact, a forensic lab in Etobicoke that worked with law firms on civil and criminal matters. The results came back 11 days later. Midazolam. A benzodiazepine, Patricia explained, used in medical settings as a sedative. In the dose detected, it would not have been lethal for a healthy adult woman in her 40s. In a 74-year-old woman with Margaret's existing heart condition, however, it had been considerably more dangerous than Daniel likely intended. I read that sentence in Patricia's email 3 times. More dangerous than Daniel likely intended. Meaning he had intended something. Patricia filed a report with Toronto Police Service that same afternoon. She also introduced me to a forensic accountant named Howard who had the quiet, methodical energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed finding things. Howard took 6 days. What he found was this. Over the previous 22 months, Daniel had moved just under $400,000 from our joint account, and 2 lines of credit that had been opened in both our names accounts I hadn't known existed into a holding account registered under a numbered company in Ontario. The numbered company had 2 directors. Daniel was one. Melissa, last name Ferraro, age 34, currently residing in a 2-bedroom condo in Liberty Village that had been purchased 14 months ago, was the other. I sat with that information for one evening. I allowed myself that one evening. I made dinner for Sophie. I helped her with her grade 3 science project about the water cycle. I read to her until she fell asleep. And then I sat in the dark of my kitchen and felt the full weight of 11 years restructure itself into something I didn't have a word for yet. The next morning I was fine. Or something that functioned like fine. The detective assigned to the case was a woman named Sergeant Dion, based out of a division on Peel Street. She was methodical, unhurried, and asked questions, the way someone lays out pieces of a puzzle, not rushing toward the picture, just placing each piece with care. I gave her everything. The lab results on the glass. Howard's financial documentation. The account records Patricia had compiled. The name Melissa Ferraro. The condo in Liberty Village. She asked me, at one point, directly and without judgment, about the glass switch. About what I'd done at the dinner. I told her the truth. I had seen my husband put something into a glass intended for me. I had switched it with someone else's glass, and that person had been harmed as a result. I told her I understood what that meant. I told her I was not going to construct a more flattering version of events for her benefit. Sergeant Dion looked at me for a moment over her notepad. I appreciate that, she said. I won't pretend the weeks that followed were clean or simple. They weren't. There were conversations I had with Patricia that I will never repeat to anyone. There were decisions made about how to characterize my actions at that dinner that required a level of legal nuance I still don't fully understand. What I know is this. The focus of the investigation was Daniel. The midazolam had been traced to a prescription pad belonging to a walk-in clinic physician in North York who would eventually lose his license and face his own separate set of charges. Daniel's fingerprints were on the vial found during the search of his office at home. The text messages on the second phone retrieved under warrant were unambiguous. There was one from the week before the dinner, sent to a number that investigators identified as belonging to the clinic physician. She's signing everything over to a trust next month. It needs to happen before that. It needs to happen before that. I read that line in the disclosure documents Patricia shared with me, and I sat very still for a long time. What Daniel had not known, what I had not told him, had not told anyone except Patricia, was that the trust paperwork was already signed. I had signed it 10 days before the dinner, in Patricia's office, with 2 witnesses present. The $3.2 million was not sitting in an account with my name on it. It was in a properly structured family trust, with Sophie as the primary beneficiary and me as the sole trustee. Daniel had no access to it. Had never had access to it. He had planned something careful and terrible based on information that was already out of date. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Daniel was charged with attempted murder, criminal negligence causing bodily harm, and fraud over $5,000. The fraud charges alone, given the documented $400,000 and the numbered company, were significant enough that his bail conditions included surrendering his passport and reporting weekly to a station, Scarborough. He moved in with his sister Rebecca, who had, to her credit, stopped speaking to him almost immediately after Sergeant Dion paid her a visit. Margaret recovered fully. I know, because Rebecca called me, about 3 weeks after Daniel's arrest, to tell me so and to say something else. She said, "I want you to know that I believe you, and I'm sorry for everything my family put you through." I didn't know how to respond to that. I said thank you. I said I was glad her mother was okay. I meant both things. The divorce was filed by me, through Patricia, the same week as the charges. Daniel did not contest the custody arrangement for Sophie, in part, I think, because his lawyer advised him that contesting anything at that moment would look extraordinarily bad. Sophie stays with me. She knows her father is going through something very serious. She knows that our family has changed. She is 8 years old and she is remarkable, and on the worst days, she is the only reason I remember to eat. I sold the Rosedale house. It was too large for 2 people, and it had been his idea to buy at a house that cost more than we could comfortably afford, in a neighborhood he wanted because of what it signaled rather than because of how it felt. I bought a place in the Beaches instead, smaller, brighter, walking distance from Sophie's school and from the lake. There's a back porch that catches the afternoon light in a way that makes the whole house feel warm even in November. I drink my coffee there on Saturday mornings while Sophie sleeps in. I think about the glass sometimes. I think about the decision I made in that room, in that fraction of a second, and I turn it over the way you turn over a stone, looking at it from every angle, trying to understand what it says about who I am. I'm not sure I've landed anywhere settled on that question. I know I was afraid. I know I acted from that fear in a way that put someone else at risk, someone who was not the person I was afraid of. I know Margaret could have died. I know that she didn't. I know that those 2 facts will sit beside each other in my mind for the rest of my life without ever fully resolving. What I also know is this. I walked out of that restaurant that night with my mind intact, my daughter safe, and a Ziploc bag in my coat pocket that would eventually put an end to something that could have ended me instead. I didn't wait for someone to believe me. I didn't hope things would sort themselves out. I paid attention. I documented. I trusted the right people. I told the truth, including the parts of the truth that made me look bad. Some mornings I stand at the window in the Beaches house with Sophie's breakfast going on the stove behind me, and I look out at the gray-green stretch of Lake Ontario and I feel something I haven't entirely named yet. It's not happiness exactly. It's closer to the feeling of ground under your feet after a long time of not being sure where you were standing. On the first morning I moved into the new house, before the furniture arrived, before Sophie woke up, I opened a bottle of Riesling from Prince Edward County that I'd been saving for no reason I could identify. I poured a glass. I stood at the kitchen window. I thought about all of it, every piece of it, from the beginning. Then I raised the glass, just to myself, just to the room, and I drank it.